Paula, thank you so much for joining us for a little interview.
Hello, Paula.
So what we know about you is that you've been very close with Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa for many years, and you've done two 3-year retreats of two great retreats,
They were
each of
4 years.
which,
They were
oh
4 years.
wow, 4 years even. So yeah, you spend an incredible amount of time basically in solitary retreat, and now you are dividing your time in personal retreats and teaching activities. So yeah, we're really honored to interview you and ask you a few questions.
Yeah. Paula doesn't like to be called Lama Paula, but it is naturally a title of a teacher. So how would you call yourself then, Paula?
Just Paula.
Just Paula. So just
I
Paula.
mean, to me, Lama is, well, for one thing, it's Tibetan. And for number two, to me, a Lama is someone who has clairvoyance and someone who has, can really guide disciples on the path to enlightenment. And so for me, Lama is reserved to really great teachers, teachers who have really high realizations. And anyone other than that is just a friend. But I know in the Kagyu tradition, all you have to do is do a retreat, 3-year retreat, and you get called Lama. But I mean, I'll tell you, Lama Zopa one time, because I lived with him for a little over a year and was his cook and spent a lot of time with him. I was very privileged. And it was after I'd done my first 4-year retreat. And he looked at me one time because I was ordained for it at his advice at that time. And my name was Ninjay. And he looked at me one time and he said, if you were a Kagyu, you'd be Lama Ninja. Ha, 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 ha. Like that was like totally stupid. So I just don't relate to it. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah.
But undoubtedly, you're bringing a lot of clarity to many people's practices, both in your private teaching and also leading retreats. So we can agree that you are a Dharma teacher.
Yeah, we can agree that.
Wonderful. And so how did your journey with the Dharma started? How did you met Buddhism?
Well, I actually met Buddhism a really long time ago. I was very fortunate to grow up in the San Francisco Bay Area, which has a big Japanese population. And there was a Japanese garden, a beautiful Japanese garden in San Francisco. There still is in Golden Gate Park. And my dad used to like to go there, and we would go there, and there was this big Buddha statue, which I remember being about 20 feet tall because I was only 3 feet tall. And I went back, it's not that big, but I always had some kind of, it was a big Japanese black stone Buddha. And I just always remember loving to be with that Buddha. And I also remember my grandmother was a amazing person. She traveled all over the world by herself when she was, back in the early 60s. And she had a Buddha statue on top of her TV. And when I was really little, like, 1 and 2 and 3, I used to watch TV and just look at this Buddha statue. And it was back in the days when she'd say, rub his tummy for good luck. I don't know if you've heard that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I used to go rub the Buddha for good luck and make prayers. And I can remember my favorite cartoon, because this is like 2, 3 years old, was this cartoon called Mighty Mouse. And Mighty Mouse went, Mighty Mouse, to save the day, here I come to save the day, because Mighty Mouse is on the way. And so I associated Mighty Mouse, who was the savior, with Buddha as a tiny, it's like a toddler. So that was my introduction to Buddhism. And when I got to be 14, just I don't really know how it happened, but I got into this honors seminar course with Mr. Dillon, who was an Indian Sikh. And there was about 20 of us, and we sat around in a circle like we were graduate students at Berkeley. And we read 2 books in like a whole, semester. And we read them out loud and we would discuss them. And the first book was the Bhagavad Gita, and the second book was the Compassionate Teachings of Buddha.
Wow.
So I got my first Dharma teachings when I was 14. And then that spring, I went down to Big Sur. And by then, you see, this is the late 60s, and Zen and Buddhism is kind of cool, you know. And it was the same year that the Beatles had gone to India, and so it was like cool. And Gary Snyder was a, I don't know if you've ever heard of Gary Snyder, but he's a very popular poet and a big movement, and it's kind of the eco, whatever you call it, I can't remember what they call it now, but you know, the spiritual ecological movement, you know, there's a word for it, eco Dharma, whatever. But anyway, he was of course that hadn't happened yet. He was just Gary Snyder. And I loved his poetry because I loved wilderness. And so I was down in Big Sur, and I just decided I was going to sit down and meditate. I didn't know what it was. And I sat down and meditated, and I had a very, very profound experience, which now, 50 years later, I realized that I just had really strong imprints because I just had some experience of the nature of mind, just sitting by the sea and looking at the ocean and letting my mind gaze out and just deciding that, okay, well, I don't know what this is, but I'm just going to relax my mind. And it was very, very profound. And I was changed after that, you know, as you can imagine, you know, it's like you get a taste of something else. And I wasn't stoned. I mean, we were all getting high back then, but I wasn't stoned or anything. And when I went back to the city, I remember my parents had kind of a closet under the stairs, like Harry Potter. And I wanted to move into my cave. It's like I wanted to move in and make that my bedroom. And it's funny because my little brother, well, he's not little now, but he was like 7 or something. But he remembers that. He said, "Remember you wanted to move into the closet?" He just told me that recently. And but I was just like stunned, you know, I was really stunned. And I couldn't find an adult to help me explain what happened to me. Not anywhere could I find anyone that would help me. And so I kind of, at that point in time, developed a little bit of mistrust of my culture and my world. And that's when I began to like, there's got to be something else somewhere. So I was pretty young when I started looking and searching and reading. And then it was actually 10 more years before I actually met Tibetan lamas, because they weren't there then. You know, they were still in India, and wasn't like the Japanese Buddhists. And Zen Buddhism was a little bit too austere for me. You know, I like to sing and dance, and I used to like smoke pot, and it was like I couldn't give all that up to go sit and get hit on the back by a guy with a stick. You know, it just sounded you know, and having to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and going down to the Zendo, because I knew people who did that, you know. But I did read a lot of Zen books, and so I started reading. There wasn't a lot back then, but the one that really influenced me, and maybe you've heard of it, was a book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by Suzuki Roshi. And Suzuki Roshi was one of the few, now I'm taking a long time to tell you this story. I was supposed to be done with this already, but he was one of the few Zen priests in World War II that was a pacifist, that was against the war. And he then came to San Francisco, and he's the one who's basically made the whole Zen movement in San Francisco. You know, maybe you've heard of Tassajara Zen Center and places like that. He was the man behind that. And it was just this short little book of his talks, and it became my Bible, and I would carry it around and I would give it to people. And, you know, that was my book, you know, was the Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. But I wasn't much of a meditator. What I was a dancer, because I wanted to be in touch with my body, and being still and meditating wasn't quite right. And also I think like most people, I had a very active, what I would call now a lungi mind, you know, like the idea of just sitting watching your breath was just torturous to me, you know. And so, but when I would dance and I'd go to the ballet bar or to my modern dance classes, I could get into that zone, you know, I could get into that space, because it was a lot of concentration, but it was also movement. And I just loved the inner freedom that feeling gave me of like just dancing across the, you know, the floor. And then of course my partner was a sax player in a reggae band. And so then I loved dancing, and we would do that, you know, just that kind of dancing too. This is like now in the 70s. And then a good friend of mine from high school, who was also one of the few, into Zen, and her boyfriend had actually spent the summer at the Tassajara Zen Center because his family was, his dad was a famous photographer in Carmel, and that's where that place is. And so we would read, Dharma books together. And then, we went to university, and then she went off and lived in the middle of Australia with the Aboriginal people for a couple of years, and then met Lama Yeshe in Melbourne. And so when she came back, I think it was she started telling me about it, but then finally she came in 1979 because I almost went to a course with Lama Yeshe in 1976. She came back for that, but I was still very much into dance, and that was my thing. But it's the same, like I was saying about my rib. I had an injury and I couldn't dance for a little while, and so then she was there, and she took me to meet Lama Kunga, who was a Sakya Lama who had a Dharma center in Berkeley, and I could meditate with him. It was a different experience than the Zen people, and I just said, all you can say is I had come with the Tibetans because it was Sakadawa, and I still remember, reciting the four measurables in Tibetan and talking to him and doing Chenrezig practice, and was like, oh, this is where I belong, And she had already been to Kopan, and then so I said, well, next time Lama Yeshe comes, I'll come. So then it was the spring of 1980, and I went to a course. They didn't have their own Dharma place yet up in the mountains. And that was it. And I met Lama Yeshe, and then it was like, oh, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. And so that was it.
And how old were you at that point?
I was 25.
Okay, so 25. So from that on until your first retreat, what happened? What made you go somewhere to Asia?
Well, I met Lama, and I'll tell this now because it'll connect with later. And I was a very avid environmentalist as well. I sort of like had the art side of me, and then I had the science part of me, because that's what I was studying in university. And what I finally realized is it was Sutra and Tantra. I had this one where I had to study and do philosophy, and there was this other one where I was moving and, concentrating. But I didn't know it was Sutra and Tantra until I realized, oh, that's what I was doing, because what I studied at university was interdependence. I was ecology student, and that's all about interdependence, how everything's connected to everything else. And I had this wonderful professor who also said, well, the mind is part of that as well. You can't take your mind out of the whole environment, but anyway, so what happened? And I continued to meet Lama and met his teachers, and he, anyway, I just heard about this enlightened experience celebration that was happening in 1981 and 82 in India. And I had a friend that was going. I'd met a friend at a month-long Mahamudra retreat we did with Lama Zopa in the summer of 81. And he was going, and I saw it, and just something went ding, I need to go. And I didn't have any money. I never have had any. And I didn't know how I was going to get there. So by then I was in graduate school, and I had secured a fellowship to Berkeley. That's where they pay you to go to school, which was really amazing. That where I was supposed to be studying how the mind fits in with ecology. That was what I was studying. And so the professor could understand why I wanted to go to India and study with the Dalai Lama, So he was so cool. His name was Arnold Schultz. So Arnold paid me as if I was his TA for that spring quarter. And so he gave me the money to go to India with the idea that I would come back. So the university actually paid for my trip to India. But then when I got to India, and at this time it was Kabji Song Rinpoche, you probably heard of the new one, who's equally amazing in a different, but Kabji Song Rinpoche was like, you can't imagine. You just can't imagine. There are just no lamas like that now. You just cannot imagine what it was like. This is why I say I'm not a lama, where you sit in a teaching with him, and suddenly you're visualizing everything perfectly and you're understanding everything. And he's like, it was like, I mean, we had all read Lord of the Rings by then, and I mean, I'd read Lord of the Rings when I was a teenager. It was like meeting Gandalf. He was just like this. He even had a beard. He was just this amazing teacher. You know, and I was just having these experiences, and it was all because of Lama Yeshe's kindness, because Lama Yeshe arranged for us to have Mahamudra teachings from His Holiness, the whole Guya Samaja commentary from Chebdi Sangha Rinpoche that took like a month, so detailed. Then we had the chut. We got all the detailed chut teachings. And then it was the Haruka Chakras and Varbhati Mandala. Can you imagine? Like all with like the guy who's like doesn't just talk about it. He is it. He like is the blazing and dripping, and he is Haruka, and and so when he would teach it, it was really like, you know, I was having amazing experiences, and I didn't know I hadn't had, I mean, I'd had empowerments, but I hadn't had detailed commentaries on High Suga Tantra. And when I heard what it was, that's like, wow, this is how you build the body of a Buddha. This is how you die. And because I'd been trained in science, it's like, this is science. This isn't religion. This is a science of how you create the body of a Buddha. Because we had all these illusory body teachings, because Guya Samaj is all about illusory body. And it was like, wow, and this is how you do it. And so and because of the other kind of teachings, all the morality and all the Lam Rim teachings, I thought, this is the most revolutionary discipline in the world today. And the world needs, that needs to know about it. And so I didn't know at the time, because I had this fellowship to Berkeley, if I was going to go back and be in the academic world, and, I could become a professor and blah, blah, blah. But what happened was I was so taken with Sangha Rinpoche and had so much experiences. And one of the experiences I had, I can remember very clearly standing on the balcony of the Green Hotel. If you've ever been to Dharamsala, Green Hotel's still there. And I was really fortunate because Dimalocha Rinpoche, who was another great Lama, I shared a wall with him. His room was on the other side of my room. And so my bed was right next to Dimalocha Rinpoche, and I'd wake up in the morning to his Dorjeen bell, So I was just getting blasted, And so I can remember sitting on the balcony and looking out over, because Dharamsala you can't believe what it was like back then. It was so amazing. There was like 1/50th the amount of people that are there now, and there weren't cars, and it was just an amazing place. And the Green Hotel was at the end of the road, and it was just mountains after that. And you could just sit there, and I just sat there, and I remember thinking about Sangha Rinpoche and seeing everything become like a mirage. It all became like a mirage. And then I had this vision of Sangha Rinpoche, and then I just felt my heart just like, like the sun just exploded in my heart. And it was like, there's nothing more important in this life than bodhicitta. That's the only thing worth living for is bodhicitta. You just bodhicitta. And it was like my mind just went into this like Star Wars, and they go into warp speed and go, like that. So my mind went like that, and I was just like stunned. It was kind of like, again, when I was 14, I was just stunned until my friend Jack Morrison, who was the one who encouraged me to come to India and helped me come to India, he came walking along, and then I, whatever trance I was in, and I came out of it, and I was like, holy shit, So anyway, that's not fair to say. That's not a nice thing to say, but it was kind of like that, and so then, and at the same time, Nick Rebush, dear Nick, Dr. Nick, he had transcribed, this is the really early days, there's no books, there's one book, it's called Advice from a Spiritual Friend that they had published, which was one of and I had that book. There's a few books, not many. And so he had transcribed Lama Yeshe's teachings on Vajrasattva, which is now a book called Becoming Vajrasattva. And I would read that while Sangha Rinpoche was giving lungs, because you also get all these lungs, and there's like long, long times where you're just listening to Tibetan. And they told you could do that, so I read that. by the time I read that, I'm like, I got to do this retreat. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this retreat. So then the question was, it was this, am I going to go back to Berkeley and do this, or was I, what was I, or was I, because I didn't want to really, I mean, I didn't know yet, because I've always been tortured by, what's more beneficial for the world, because my parents were activists, it's like your whole life is supposed to be benefiting sentient beings, they didn't say it like that, but, they were civil rights activists and Berkeley people. I mean, I know Berkeley's just a whole city of activists, you don't realize that until you leave, but Berkeley's a really different place. And but anyway, so finally I remember my friend Stefano, who passed away, but he was the director of Tashida Retreat Center at the time, and he was a monk, Italian monk from Bologna, and a really good person. And he did a tarot reading for me. He did 2 tarot readings, and he said to me, he said, well, because I really couldn't decide, and I had to decide, was I going to stay or, go back? And my dad was like, what's happening to her? And because by then I'm like 28, I think, and so Saturn return, it was that, I don't know if you know about astrology, but it was in my Saturn return. And so he did this tarot reading, and it came out, he said, well, if you go back to the university, you'll become the king of swords, which is the intellect. But if you decide to just do what you want to do, which is devote your life to retreat, you'll become the queen of hearts. So,
wonderful.
So I decided to be the queen of hearts, and it's interesting now because like my sort of signature teaching, I can say now that I've been teaching for a while, it's like, that's what people say, oh, you teach from the heart, so I thought, oh, well, that's good. Maybe he was right. That's what you can call me Queen Paula. No, I'm just completely
very catchy. So how that journey of opening the heart and transferring your main focus from the head to the heart came through your retreats
and also my teacher Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, Lama Yeshe was very, very profound Mahamudra teacher, very, very profound. And that's all I ever really taught. But I didn't really, it took me about 20 years to figure that out, because it's like he died and he was my main teacher. I mean, I love Lama Zopa Rinpoche, but the one that really attracted me was Lama Yeshe. And after that, of course, Lama Zopa became my advisor, my teacher, my Lama. And I mean, just, I have undying devotion and reverence to both of them, actually. But Lama Zopa took care of me, really took care of me for years and years and years and years, And I have so much, when you meditate on the kindness of the guru, sometimes when you're younger, you don't really realize, it's like with your parents, you don't really realize how much your parents have given you. And it's a little bit like that with Lama Zopa Rinpoche and me, like you're so busy when you're a young person doing your life and doing this, and now I have to do this, and now I have to do that, and here's Lama Zopa telling you what to do, but you don't realize that he's really the engineer and orchestrating. I mean, it, but you don't really get it, And so, but anyway, but when Lama Yeshe died, I didn't really know what to do, and so there's Lama Zopa, and Lama Yeshe was a Gelugpa. But I didn't realize it. Then I was setting myself up for 20 years of intellectual teaching, and where could I find the Dzogchen and the Mahamudra again? And I mean, it took me 30 years to figure that out. I kept saying, well, when are these teachers going to meditate with us? And actually, when are we going to get those kinds of experiences like I used to get from my teachers? And they don't. As far as I know. I don't. It's all about monastics and teachings, and I mean, and it's all really wonderful. I'm not saying that, but it's like I come from a space of what does it feel like? I'm a sensate person. I want to know what it feels like. I want to know because of all my, dance training. So I want to know what it's doing in my body. I just don't want to know like, okay, I can memorize the tens of these and the fives of these, and I can tell you about interdependence, and I can tell you about, I'm a good student. I graduated from Berkeley. I can do all that stuff. But yeah, and so more recently, I mean, and I always read Dzogchen books and stuff like that. So I always, especially in the beginning, because there were so few books. But in the last few years, I finally, connected with, well, 10 years, and with Trungpa Rinpoche and Mingyur Rinpoche and Sugna Rinpoche. And so it's finally like the missing piece that I'm really grateful to them too. But you see, Lama Yeshe taught me all that. And then, and then, and I wouldn't have known what to do in all those retreats if it hadn't been for the experiences that I had with Lama Yeshe, and also Lama Zopa. I mean, Lama Zopa Rinpoche was one of those teachers that if you have an initiation with him, or even sometimes just doing yunes with him, and he'd talk about emptiness, bam, it's like it's gone. Um, and I'm not faulting any other teachers, because I'm sure there are teachers in the Gelugpa tradition that do that. I just don't have the karma with them. I didn't have that karmic connection. So I'm not, saying, but just in terms of my life, I remember, because I've had some incredible teachers, I'm moving on to teachers, like Kirti Sentu Rinpoche taught me so much, and Reba Rinpoche, and they teach you with their, you need the advice. I mean, you need all the teachings. I'm not saying that, you need all those teachings, but I wanted something a little more too, and so then, I've been really fortunate that I've now, over my years, I've studied with, first of all, in the early days, Lama Zopa said, you have karma with the Sakyas. And so I did a Lamdre with Sakya Trinzen that was 3 months long in 1987. So, and I had more of a Lam Rim connection there, because they teach, the Sakya is almost, it's very similar. And so it was an incredible experience in India. There were like 15 Westerners and 300 Tibetans, but Sakya Trinzen would come and teach us every afternoon in English, and we had good translators. There's a teacher there a teacher now from Australia called Lama Chodak, and he was there helping us and translating us and for us, and like teaching us, because the Lamdre is amazing. It's like you get this whole Lam Rim, and then you get how to do all the preliminaries. So they teach you, like, you get a few days on prostrations and mandalas and all, and Chodak would teach that, and then Sakya Trinzen comes, and you get like one entire tantric teaching. It's like you get Vajra initiation and Vajrayogini initiation and the Mahakal and all the protectors, and then when they give an initiation, they only give them to 25 people at a time. So it takes him a whole week to get everybody initiated. And it's so cool. It's like you give him your Dorjin bell, and then he gives it to you, and it's all very hands-on, and he was so hands-on with us. So you asked me about my teacher. So that was also a very significant time in my life, was to go to India for that. And yeah, so, and I told and it was Jampa, meeting Jampa that same time in Dharamsala in 1982. Jampa was finishing his Yamantaka retreat. And, Jampa, like all of us, he was really good looking when he was young, and but he was a monk. And anyway, so I'm a big outdoors person. I love backpacking. I love being in nature. And so I would always go walking in the hills. And I ran into Jampa one day, and we just sat and talked for a long time. And he told me he was doing a 3-year retreat. And I didn't really know what that was. I was like, I'm going to do it too. I want to be like Jampa. And so that's what happened. And so, and also in India, I met my friend Roger Munro, who, this thing in India, these teachings, these series of teachings, Lama and Yeshe invited like all the FPMT people to come there. So there were like maybe 200 or 300 people there. And we all kind of, the monks and nuns and lay people, and Roger and I were like the only people that we knew that wanted to do retreat. And it was interesting because he was really good at Iyengar yoga. So he had a big background in yoga, and I had a background in yoga and dance. And I think that we had ingested more of those teachings than other people had because we were already open. You know, our chakras and our subtle bodies had already been primed with yoga, which is how it should be, you know. And so, and I would always meet him walking in the mountains too. And so he said, well, I'll help you. We'll do this together, you know. So then we teamed up and we stayed together for 32 years. And I mean, we didn't really have personalities that worked together very well, you know. But back then, there were so few people doing stuff like that. We really helped each other. You know, he had skills and I had skills. And although we did solitary retreats, like, you know, I'd raise the money, he'd build a house. You know, I'd help him build a house, but I couldn't build a house by myself. I would just do like, you know, hold the boards and hit the, you know, and, you know, do stuff like that, you know. And so we went off together and we told Lama Yeshe that we wanted to become Mahasiddhas. Because you see, having all these teachings and they say you can do it in a 3-year retreat and you're in your 20s, you're like, well, sure, by the time I'm 40, I'm going to be enlightened, you know?
Yeah. Classic.
So I always tell these young people, you know, but you know, you never know. There might be somebody who has that kind of karma, but it wasn't me. I'm not enlightened, but I don't regret, you know, what I did. So, you know, we spent 8 years doing retreats and doing nundros and taking more teachings. And because there's, you know, one thing people don't understand is a Gelugpa Great Retreat is not anything like the Nyingmas and the Kagyu 3 retreats. They are more like, you know, getting a master's degree in meditation or something, because they just, you do your nundros, you get to get, it's sort of like what we got in India, you know, because there were 3 of those teachings, you know, so it's like you get all the information in the Gelugpa. I mean, Gelugpas is really amazing, and people don't understand. They think it's this, you know, just monastic intellectual thing, but Lama Tsongkhapa has a whole ear whispered lineage, you know, where the Nundro is more extensive than any other group, you know, and so, but you get all the teachings, and then you go do the Nundros, and then you do the retreats, whereas they do it all together in a group, you know. But with us, you know, you have to do it all, and you have to do it by yourself. You do it by yourself, you know, all alone, you know, and you're supposed to have enough knowledge and experience that you can handle being by yourself. You know, there's no teacher helping you. Lama Zopa came to see me once in my retreats, you know.
In 4 years,
then,
once.
yeah, yeah, and the same the second time, and you know, this is before email, so you just pray.
Do your thing. So the first 4 years were focused basically on the Nendra and going through the preliminaries for you,
Yeah, well,
or
that was
something
about
on
8 years. That was about 8 years of doing that. You know, because we had to get teachings and preliminaries and other retreats, you know, like Tara retreats and White Makala retreats, and you know, other kinds of retreats too. But and I ended up doing Vajrasattva retreat 3 times. You know, I spent 2 years doing Vajrasattva, and then to bring back Lama Yeshe, that's, I won't go into those details, but and after doing that, from 1982 to 1985, I did Vajrasattva retreat, and I always get hot talking on these things. And Lama, this is before email, you know, I got a letter from Lama Zopa, and he said, stop doing Vajrasattva retreat and get ready to do a great retreat. And you have to do these 9 nundros, you know. And so then it's like, well, what deity are you going to pick? You know, what deity do you want to pick? You know? So of course I wanted a female deity, but it was a toss-up, you know, is it going to be Chittamani Tara? Is it going to be Vajrayogini? But anyway, I did Vajrayogini retreat, and you know, it's like when you do those lay rooms, you know, you guys do the 100,000 counting. It's 100 of those back to back. Is what it is.
Enormous.
And then at the end, there's all this other stuff you do at the end, you know. And Jampa Shaman came to visit while we were doing the fire pujas, because you have to say 1,000,000 mantras in a fire puja. So it's not, it's many, many, many fire pujas, you know. In fact, it was 77 days of fire pujas, you know. So it's really a great retreat. And I think that people just don't know, you know, they just don't know. And it's not 3 years, it's however long it takes you to say, you know, 11.5 million mantras, of course. But I didn't know that you could take longer. And so I was really cranking, you know, to get, and if I'd known, I would have taken 5 or 6 years, because there wasn't a lot of relaxed time to do things like completion stage practice, you know. But anyway, it is what it is, and life is what it is, you know.
So in total, what retreats you say that you now did during this 4 or 8 years actually? Which of these you completed? So if you could list, so we get an idea. You mentioned Vajrayogini. You mentioned Chittamanitara.
Well, then after, well, then there was all those Nundros and other, like Hayagriva, and there was a lot of retreats. I'm not going to go into all of them, you know. There's Hayagriva retreats, secret Vajrapani retreats, you know, whatever Rinpoche said, you know, I was just following Rinpoche's advice, and Nundros and lots of Vajrasattva. And but then you see, we met Reba Rinpoche, and he said, well, he said, you created an incredible amount of merit in that you're, because right, I won't tell what he did, but in his retreat, he didn't do the same deity as I did. And we were in 2 separate places, but 2 separate houses, but they were in the same, we were at Milarepa Center in Vermont. And with incredible weather, where we lived without running water or electricity when it was 40 below zero, in little tiny houses that were 7 feet by 7 feet. You know, we lived like the yogis do in India. You know, we didn't live, it wasn't, you know, we didn't, like I said, no electricity, no running water, no, you know, we cooked outside because we were poor and other reasons. But so then Rebbe Rinpoche said, well, that was all really great, but you need to clear the obstacles now. So now you need to do another one. You need to do Yamantaka retreat. So that took 4 years too.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I got very interested in chud practice. So then that's when I started doing these 3-month, 4-month chud retreats. That's because I mean, just karma, you know, you just like your karma takes you here, your karma takes you there. Now my karma took me here, you know, and so it's kind of like that, you know. And but that's enough of retreats and stuff. So then I, you know, I wanted to have really great conditions, and so I got involved in this place called Land of Calm Abiding in California, and I wanted to move there along 10 years before I actually did. But then I spent a couple of years delving into the land of administration, which, you know, Rinpoche got me out of there as fast as he could. But somebody had to save that land, that place, and because it's an amazing place. And now my friend Roger, the one that, you know, I met, he's been in retreat there for the last 10 years. 10 years they've been in retreat, hasn't come out. And I think he might just do it this life, you know. But my karma is a bit different. Lama Zopa, you know, he gave me a different job to do, but that's okay. You know, I don't, you know, when you're younger, it's like, oh, I have, you know, practice becomes very, you know, I have to do this practice and that practice, whatever, you know, but now I realize it's just about making merit, and it's just about practicing with whatever comes, whatever happens to you, you have to make it Dharma, you know, and following the Guru's advice. And so, I mean, Lama Zopa's passed now, as you know, but his last advice to me was he wanted me to lead retreats for his people. So so that's what I've been doing, and trying to navigate being in the world more. And my life after, you know, I mean, it's just amazing the magic that happens when you really give up on this life and devote yourself to a Lama that can guide you to enlightenment, not just a nice teacher, but a Lama that's clairvoyant and can say, now you need to do this and now you need to do that. And you give your life to them.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you've done that really out of this awakened bodhicitta, that you were not barely following somebody that seems to be an authority figure. You really believed in that because of that experience that awakened in you that need and that realization, that only thing that makes sense this life. So
well, I mean, I grew up in a culture that was very aware of the suffering in the world. I grew up during the Vietnam War in a culture that was very anti-war, very pacifist. And, I became aware of the suffering of the human realm at a very 10 years old, 9 years old. And I was lucky, I had a very loving parents and, I didn't have any trauma growing. Every kid gets some, like in school and stuff. But, and I just always, my whole life is like, we have to turn this world around, And I think because of where I grew up, I wanted to change the world because that's how people think in Berkeley. It's like we're going to change the politics and we're going to stop, the wars, and we're going to stop climate change. And, and I first got involved because I thought the Dharma would be the way to do that, because this is, I thought, well, if everybody just could, study Lam and bodhicitta and everything, that all change. And then, the whole world would change. And that's why we need to get enlightened. That's why I needed to get enlightened so I could be a great teacher and inspire all these people. And, it's so idealistic. But it was finally in that Yamantaka retreat when finally, sat back and went, this is the human realm. It's not going to change. How many years have you been studying the Lam Rim? What is the human realm? It's, ignorance, hatred, greed, pride, jealousy. It's not going to change. So what can you do? Well, you can just be, what the Lamas, they reach a hand down to you and say, take my hand and I'll help you get out. Yeah. And then you can come back and take other people's hands and help them get out. And I think those of us in the Dharma, it's like we've already got 1 foot out of samsara. And so we need to spend our lives to get 2 feet out so that we can be like our gurus, and really benefit. And especially now, I knew that climate change was coming when I was a teenager, and it's here now, and it's going to be big time suffering. And so what I've come to the realization now that I feel I'm not going to change the world, but what I really want to do is, turn on as many people I can to the feeling experience of what bodhicitta is, to have a real experience of empathy and healing and care and, that transforms people. But I also think it's really important to preserve the Dharma, and not just the Dharma on paper, but real Dharma. Because if human beings survive into the next century, and I'm not sure they will, but if the human race survives, and I think it's going to go through some pretty tough times, it's like we want to have Buddhism there for who's ever's left, because as far as I'm concerned, there's really great traditions around, but it has the most benefit because of the teachings on emptiness. All the religions talk about compassion, and we need compassion. But as long as you believe in true existence of yourself, there's always, you're never going to get it, because the thing about the I coming up is as soon as that comes up, it doesn't matter how much you want to be compassionate, you can't be, because you're just like, oh, me first. And that is our deepest instinct, to survive. We're still cavemen, and like the saber-toothed tigers around the corner all the time. We're always still, if you study neuroscience, we're still scanning the world constantly. Our bodies are looking for danger,
Yeah, yeah.
And so
That's one of the pathology of nowadays. Like nobody is really embodied, nobody is able to regulate, and we
Yeah,
perpetuate that
yeah,
samsara in even more speed because of
yeah,
that. This
yeah.
lack of empathy,
And so,
lack of awareness of our own body, of ours, of
yeah,
others.
yeah. And so, there's just a few minutes left because what I really wanted to talk about, I don't like talking about myself, but you wanted to know what Dharma can bring about Dharma coming in the West. And this is what I really wanted to talk to you about, which is that this point, which is that we're so unregulated and we're so traumatized, and that for to do what I feel like, and now, I didn't have confidence or anything, but recently, because Rinpoche made me teach for the last 10 years, I can feel, I can say with confidence that I do have an open heart. It has worked. You have to say the Dharma works, or there's no point in asking people to enter the path. And to be honest, 10 years ago, I was sort of like, do I really want to teach this? Because people don't get it. People aren't getting it.
Mm.
Because, and this is what I wanted to say, is that the thing that was so great about my university education was that we studied, in order to try to solve the environmental problems, we were trying to teach people to think outside the box and to realize that everything's connected to everything else, and to have an interdisciplinary approach to life. To not just think, okay, now I'm a biologist, that's all I do, or now I'm an engineer, I just do engineering, but really realizing that you have to have a little bit of it all.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I met the lamas, you see, I could see the context, the cultural context that it came from, and that this was a culture that was completely unpolluted, had very little trauma, and was like, didn't have machines, no clocks. I think half the trauma that I experienced as a child was just trying to get school on time. Like,
Yeah, and actually also back there in their communities, like the families and community of the village or a town was also supporting the development of the human being without additional stressors, were more like really feeding that knowledge and sense of integrity and groundness and belonging.
So how would you see the development of Dharma, or especially Vajrayana, Tibetan Buddhism in the West?
Well,
And
this is what I wanted to, that's where I was going. That was the next thing I was going to say, was that there's two things I want to say, which is, the first one is, so if you look at our society, what we are good at is, intellectual. We're sociologists, we're political scientists, we're, we do all kinds of science, we do philosophy. And so the Dharma fits in there really well, and that's all we have.
Mm.
And this is what terrifies me, is because that's not enough, and there's no context in our culture to hold the jewels of Dharma, which is what's going to transform our culture and what we need in these climate change times, which is connection with the elements, connection with nature, connection with the earth spirits and the water spirits. And this part of Tibetan Buddhism is very little utilized, because we're so eager to, get our PhDs in Buddhist philosophy, or, learn all the tantras and be able to spit it back out again, that this is how you do tantric practice, and it's all up here, and everybody gets lung because it's not here, And so that's really a big deal, that the healing the wounds of the heart, we have to do that, and we have to reconnect with nature, and because I have seen lamas on more than one occasion, different lamas, change the weather. And what's our big problem right now? And is anybody learning to do the pujas that change the weather? Is anybody teaching the pujas that learn to change the weather? I know Kitty Senchu Rinpoche went all around the world doing pujas to help climate change. He went to Antarctica, he went everywhere, and it's like, first, we don't have a context within which to hold this stuff, because Christianity, the Catholics killed it 1,000 years ago when they killed all the Druids, you know? And my friend who introduced me to the Dharma dropped Buddhism about 15, 20 years ago and became a Druid, you know? And of course, she still holds, bodhicitta and emptiness and everything, but her practice is Druidry because that's what's healing the planet.
But now also among the Buddhist community, I notice increased interest in Naga-sang, in all the pujas to spirits. So that's actually reviving that, that's for sure.
Well,
and
I'm really happy to hear that, because but then the other thing that, so these are things I feel are kind of missing in the Western Dharma world that we need to really try to cultivate if we're going to have transformational Buddhism and not intellectual Buddhism. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, I remember telling my dad, because my dad was a college teacher, and I remember writing him in my retreat, and I said, Western education is two-dimensional education. I said, Dharma education is three-dimensional education, because if you do it right, it transforms the whole self, because we have to transform our hearts and our spirits. And so, but the other thing that's really missing is true renunciation, and because we can't.
What do you mean with true renunciation?
Exactly. What would be your definition?
Exactly. I mean, that's even the wrong word, but that's the word that we use. It's completely the wrong word, because when you say that, it makes you think about, uptight nuns and monks that beat themselves up, and it's not, I mean, that's what comes to my mind, but what it means is, like Alex Berzin says, seeking freedom, or Lama Yeshe said, definite emergence, like having the confidence I can get out of samsara. That's what it means. But it's also, we have to take risks. We have to take risks that like I did, it's like, I remember, saying, well, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know how I'm going to make my money. But I can remember this when I was in India making that big decision. But I know if I follow the beaten track that everybody else knows, I know where that's going to go. I'm going to end up with this job. I'm going to have some kids. I'm going to have a pension. I'm going to, I have no idea where this is going. But it's worth investigating, because the planet needs change. We need something really different,
Yeah. And Lama Jampa is calling that renunciation a spiritual determination. And it's actually, I like that definition as well. And also what you're bringing it in here is that overview of interconnectedness, like we really are interdependent, we really rely on bodhicitta as a factor of change, and that we change holistically, including hearts, not only mind, seeing the whole context and environment.
Yeah.
Would you add anything else to the recipe?
Well, there's the whole way how you do that. There's a huge methodology of how you go about that, and that's it. That's like the whole month-long retreat. Where you talk about that and do practices, because there's all the process of embodiment. There's all the process of healing your traumas. And it's like, I've said this for 30 years. I mean, we get these preliminaries, but in the West, we need preliminaries to the preliminaries. We do. We need. And I think I was just really lucky that I had studied yoga before, and I was also very interested in psychology, and healing my inner child. And I mean, I did so much of that work in my Vajrayogini retreat. It was all about, I read I had these books on healing your inner child, and I spent a lot of time, doing Tonlin with my poor little kid, inside of me, and it's and I didn't even have a bad time as a kid, So. But the other thing that Lama Zopa really, really drilled home to me was abandoning the 8 worldly concerns. And that's what I think is also missing in the Dharma. And it just breaks my heart to see the whole Dharma world. It's become another clique of, teachers and, that charge a lot of money. I mean, maybe they're good teachers, but it's like, to charge $800 for a weekend and make it, it's turning it into, they're selling Dharma in the marketplace. And as soon as you start selling Dharma in the marketplace, this is what my gurus have told me, it loses its power. And that's what's happening in the West, even with great lamas, because their students create infrastructures where, you have to like go online and send them your $500 and then you get this and you have this recording, you get to watch the recording. It's like, I don't like the way it's going. And I don't know, and I know there's goodness in that, I know there's goodness in that, but it's like, if someone does, it's good for, this is where I'm coming from. Because like, in order to do what I've done, I couldn't have a job because my job was retreat. So how are we going to create Western yogis if nobody's supporting Dharma practitioners and everybody's supposed to have enough money to pay their $800 for a weekend with Bob Thurman or whoever it is?
Yeah.
It's Bob Thurman, he's a fantastic teacher. But you know what I'm saying,
And do you have any idea how to replace it? What it will replace it with? What type of model? What type of way of teaching and learning Dharma?
Generosity. Look at Land of Joy is the place where I teach in England, and I'm not surprised that when they started, Lama Zopa told them that I should be the teacher there because they do that. They don't charge for any of their teachings, and the whole Goenka Vipassana people, they don't charge for any of their teachings, and anybody can come. No one's turned away for lack of funds, and it works. It works. And this was the biggest problem in the West, is that everybody thinks that we have to use the capitalist model and it's going to kill Dharma.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the teaching themselves, what would you recommend somebody that enters the path of Dharma or maybe enters now the path of Tantra? What type of teachings to start with and in which like rhythm?
Well, you definitely have to have one. Definitely. You can't practice Tantra if you don't understand the perfect human rebirth, if you don't understand the suffering of samsara, and particularly karma. Karma it's so important. This is another thing that makes the Dharma extraordinary in the West, because if you understand karma, there's never any reason to blame anybody for anything that happens to you. Can you imagine that? If nobody ever needed to take revenge, look at the Middle East. If nobody needed revenge, if everybody could go, I created the cause for this, and return love. If everybody could really be like Jesus, if everybody could listen to Jesus, but, and it's all very sad to me. And but as His Holiness says, just never give up. So, definitely you have to have that.
So Lamrim in whichever form.
Yeah, whichever form. And then the most important thing beyond Lamrim, that's just intellectual stuff, is one, time out. Don't feel bad about not doing anything. Take a lot of time to rest. Listen to everything that your mind says, and just the most basic, I love Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche too, because he's basic teaching is that, and it's just, and he says, when you're meditating, it's really important to be making friends with yourself. Mm-hmm. To make friends with yourself. Because you see, what happens in the West is that we're such a culture of guilt and low self-esteem and self-blame. It's just inculcated in us by the time we're born, because we get it from our parents who got it from their parents, And so the thing is, this is what I discovered, this is what I believe from my first retreat, because, you spend a long time just sitting by yourself, doing practice. And it was like in my heart here, this is my core being, this is my big love, true nature of mind. But all around it is like barbed wire fence, from all my stories about myself. And so my job was to penetrate that fence with enough self-love, because luckily for me, I read Solga Rinpoche's book, and Solga Rinpoche's book said, in the West, when you do Tonglen, you have to start with yourself.
Yeah.
And so and because the thing is, if you really want to develop concentration on any level, you know, with meditation, the first thing that happens is you feel that barbed wire fence. You know, being by yourself is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. So how are you going to concentrate when, you know, as soon as you stop thinking, you're so uncomfortable that you have to think again.
Mm.
You know, and as soon as you stop, and nowadays you can't even sit down. As soon as you sit down, you have to pick up your telephone because, you know, I mean, it's like 100 times worse than it was in the 1980s. You know, and so it's like the most important thing is to like figure out how to be able to be with yourself that's loving and kind and tender and gentle and doesn't judge you and says, yeah, yeah, you fucked up, but that's okay because, you know, your karma's like this. And, you know, just really learning to be, Lama Yeshe said it. He said, you know, if you want to be gentle with others, you have to be gentle with yourself.
Yes, yes. So do I understand this correctly that you perceive that preliminaries for the preliminaries basically building that understanding with oneself, but of course understanding of the world and the karma and all the Lamrim principles together with really getting used to who you are and befriending yourself.
That's secondary. The first thing is just learning to sit. And, you know, and I mean, I didn't do that. This is me looking back, you know, like what, you know, what, and part of it is like the whole guru devotion thing is so, so important because if you really.
Welcome back.
But anyway, maybe that's enough, you know, I mean, that's a whole other, I mean, I can talk about this other stuff for like, but that's
okay.
When I teach, that's what I try to share with people is how, as best as I can, bring Tantra, Dharma into a living experience, you know, off the page into the heart, you know.
That sounds wonderful. And actually, maybe just to recap, because we lost you after you mentioned the importance of guru devotion.
Yeah.
Maybe we can just wrap that up.
Oh, yeah, I'll just finish that because something that I've discovered recently that I found is very profound. I think about a couple of years ago, because I'm a big fan of Gabor Mate, you know, as probably most people are. And I did a you know, weekend thing with him and 4 or 5 days retreat with him or something. And you know, they talk about healing trauma, and what we need is we need unconditional love, and we need to be connected. You know, we need to be connected, and we also need to be witnessed. You know, our traumas. Like I remember Thich Nhat Hanh 30, 40 years ago when he worked with Vietnam vets, just sitting in a room where other vets could actually share. Had so much to do with their healing. And so after, you know, meditating, and I realized what I did, because when I came out of my retreats, I felt like the most important thing I could teach was just refuge and bodhicitta. That's all I wanted to do, because I felt like people didn't get it. You know, they just go Sangye Chodam, blah, 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 and then they move on. And okay, well done. You know, it's like, what is that? And so I would go around and just like break it down, you know. And then I thought, wow, you know, it's really profound, because when you really take refuge in the guru, what are you getting? Unconditional love and a witness. You know, you're supposed to, the way it works is, you know, you cry out, you give everything to the guru. You know, it's like, oh, you know, this happened and that happened, and I really want to, you know, and I need to purify this. And it's like a whole big, you know, confession and opening, and please, guru, help me. And, you know, and then, you know, and then you just feel, you just allow yourself, you imagine and you feel it, but you actually do feel it, you know, because there is a lineage, and we are connected on a spiritual level, which the internet has showed us. You know, we don't have to be in the same room to get it, you know. And so it comes down, and it begins to make you feel loved and healed, you know, guru devotion, you know, and it just doesn't come from yourself. I mean, it can, but it really helps to come from the outside. But then what happens is, then when you then you move into the next phase, which is bodhicitta, then what are you doing? You're connecting everybody. So when you really can sit and just, because a lot of times, you know, in retreat, you know, you can take refuge in bodhicitta for 45 minutes, for half an. I mean, these are the things that Lama Yeshe was so brilliant. You know, he would say, Now we're going to have bodhicitta without words. Now we're going to take refuge. Best way to take refuge is with no words at all.
Oh.
You know, like that. I mean, he was such a profound teacher. And so I took all that into my retreats, you know, and that's how you heal trauma. You can heal trauma with refuge and bodhicitta. And if you think about it, it's so much more powerful than therapy because bodhicitta motivation is so huge, you know, because it's all sentient beings. It's not me healing myself, you know, I'm doing this for all sentient beings. So I would start there. And that's where we're supposed to start, isn't it? How do we start every practice?
Yeah.
So
It sounds incredible.
Although
and then when you bring the guru into you, you know, then what happens? You know, everything opens up. You're safe. You're protected, which is what you need to heal trauma. You put up your boundaries, and you're safe and you're protected. And then I would just say, stop doing your sadhana and your words, and just sit with yourself and just be there. You know, look at your mind, because the nature of mind is right there with us all the time, but we're so busy. And we can't stop being busy because we can't stop. And how do we stop? We stop with love and connectedness and being attached to something good, you know, Sangha. Right? So, you know, in a modern way, you know, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, if we can interpret it in a psychological way, it's very profound healing. You know? But the problem with us is that we've just adopted a religion. And, you know, for me, Buddhism isn't a religion, you know, and we get into the religion and we take robes and we do this and we say these prayers and, you know, and we grew up in church, so we know how to do religion, you know, but I'm not interested in religion. You know?
So what comes first then? Learning to sit with ourselves to really be able to stop and basically entertain the present moment, or that the preliminaries as you just described?
Well, I think to be able to sit with yourself, you need refuge and bodhicitta. That's what I'm trying to explain, is that you have to create a safe place for yourself.
Right.
Before you can, because if you try to sit with yourself, you're just fighting that barbed wire fence all the time. You know, you're trying to force yourself through this barbed wire fence to concentrate, you know, and you can't. You know, so where you start with is forget about your practice, forget about, you know, being a good Buddhist, you know, and just like let yourself feel safe and protected by the gurus and the Buddhas. They're always, it takes some kind of faith and belief, but usually people, if they get this far, they've had some kind of experience, and that's why they're there. And so, you know, remember a time when you felt safe and loved, and bring that into the present and just feel safe and loved, and then send that love out to first your mom and your dad. It's all there, your mother and your father and your friends around you and your enemies in front of you, and you know, but do it with heart, do it with feeling, do it with, you know, the intention to really heal yourself, because you can't do anything for anybody until we are whole people.
Yeah, that's very profound.
Yeah. Well, Dharma is, you know, and I'm just incredibly grateful to my teachers and to all the people who, I've been a beggar all my life, you know, who I haven't worked since 1982. And it's because my friend Roger had the courage to say, we're going to do it Tibetan style. And we're going to ask people to support us. And most people don't have that courage because it's so unheard of in this culture. And one of the things we have to change is generosity. We have to support. If someone wants to do a retreat, you know, you have somebody in your Sangha who wants to do a retreat, everybody says, okay, I'm going to give you $10 a month. I'm going to give you $20 a month. And that person gets to go do it. So that we don't have to be tied into the man and be wage slaves for the rest of our lives. Somebody has to step out of the box.
And what about the rest that wants to keep their jobs or families? How would you say that they would develop along the Dharma practice nowadays?
They do the best they can. They just do the best they can. And you can't judge anybody because, you see, the thing about Dharma is that we just work with our karma, and we don't say, oh, I wish I could be doing that, or I should be like that person. Look, that person has that opportunity, and I'm sitting here with my 5 kids and I've got to go to work. Well, you make your work and your 5 kids your Dharma practice, because when it comes right, and you if you have any extra money, I mean, I like the Christian thing of tithing, 10% you give to the people who are running Dharma centers and are helping people to retreat and help people to retreat. But if you don't have that opportunity and you want that opportunity, karma, how do you create the cause? Well, if I want to do retreat, I create the cause by helping other people to retreat, because like creates like, and this is what's missing. I mean, you talk to other people like, well, when I save $30,000, $50,000, then I'm going to go do a retreat. Well, good luck, honey. You're going to be 65 years old by then. You're going to be like me with a mind that's like almost useless, So, but I think the thing is what I tell people now is that it doesn't really matter what your life looks like. It's, are you making merit? Can you just at least put a sign on your bathroom mirror? Today, I benefit my life to sentient beings, so that when you see it, when you wash your face in the morning, and you see it when you brush your teeth at night, so that whatever you did that day, you've created the cause for enlightenment, whether it's going to work in a factory, taking care of your children, being a doctor, and then as best as you can, and don't stress about, like Lama used to say, Lama Yeshe said, he said, you people, you work, 8 hours a day. Now people work more. You come home, you have a cup of coffee, and you read your sadhanas. He said it'd be much more beneficial to just lie down on the sofa and meditate on bodhicitta.
That's profound.
It is, because it's not about the words that we say. It's about what's going on in our hearts. And so that's what we need to protect. That's what we need to care for. And if it means that on Sundays you just lie around all day, or maybe you watch football because it makes you relaxed and open and happy. It's like we're so judgmental, and it's not that we shouldn't pay attention. We need to pay attention to karma, but not with the guilt and the blame and all the crap that our Western society, I mean, the most profound thing about living with Lama Zopa for a year was to see that he didn't hold on to anything. If things didn't work out for him, it was like, no karma. And I'm sitting there going like, well, God, I should have done that. And why didn't I do this? And if I'd only done this, I could have been blah, 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 and beating up on yourself, and Rinpoche would just go, it was gone. You didn't hold on to anything.
Yeah.
I think we spend so much energy in our minds, I should have done this. You could be better if you did that. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah.
But it doesn't mean we don't look at our faults, and we don't try to change them, and we don't try to pay attention, but we do it with tenderness.
Yeah. Wow. That all sounds like a real words of wisdom from the Queen of Hearts. So thank you so much.
Please don't repeat that. I should never have said that. It's still a work in progress,
Well, Paula, I mean, we are very inspired, and so thank you so much for sharing both about your life's journey, but also your wisdom and insights of Dharma in the West. So actually, for all the listeners, we will put in a link to Paula's website below the video, and also a link where you could sign up for our newsletter. So if we organize a teaching with you, maybe sometime within the upcoming months, I guess we discussed the practice of para, but whatever it'll be, we'll inform everyone about it. And so thank you so much for your precious time and all the inspiration.
And we look forward to learn from you even more.